sign of time moves forward. There are no major changes, but staying well informed is top priority. Your last assignment, Soviet Union, begin a revolution. I filled in the agents sent to China, deception, one of our top agents. Well done. You and useful aides paved the way for our great victory. Whatever it takes to regain our rightful place once again home. Stalin murdered his people by the millions, and I'll kill millions more. Think you can handle in the air 305 million more? We have a new assignment for you, the United States. Then you had better disarm them first. Up the dosage of waste byproduct fluoride like you did in Soviet Russia. Then it won't need any. Apologies, but we have had operatives to told my agents going off script. Seeing as you've been pursuit status for this long, we'll review get you up to speed from start to finish. Actually, one of our operatives, Aldous Huxley, won't see it in his own words. Although I did, a little Ed, very little.
We were talking about technology in general and the effects it's likely to have on society. The techniques of terrorism have been known from time immemorial, and people have employed them with more or less ingenuity, sometimes with the utmost crudity, sometimes with a good deal of skill acquired by a process of trial and error, finding out what the best ways of using torture, imprisonment, constraints of various kinds. But if you are going to control any population for any length of time, you must have some measure of consent. It's exceedingly difficult to see how pure terrorism can function indefinitely. It can function for a fairly long time, but I think sooner or later you have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is the ultimate in malevolent revolutions, about which I wrote 30 years ago a fable, The Brave New World, which is society making use of all the devices at that time available, and some of the devices which I imagined to be possible, making use of them, first of all, to standardize the population, to iron out inconvenient human differences, to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system. Predictions which were purely fantastic when I made them 30 years ago have come true, or seem in process of coming true, that a number of techniques about which I talked seem to be here already, and that there seems to be a general movement in the direction of this kind of method of control by which people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which by any decent standard they ought not to enjoy. This, I mean, the enjoyment of servitude. This process, as I say, has gone on over the years. I've become more and more interested in what is happening. In George Orwell's book, 1984, Future, of a society where control was exercised wholly by terrorism, think about these other methods of control, these non-violent methods. I'm inclined to think the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships, will be not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient. That if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of having their differences ironed out and being made amenable to mass production methods on the social level, if you can do this, then you are likely to have a much more stable, a much more lasting society, a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps. So my own feeling is that the 1984 picture was tinged in which Orwell was living, but that the past and present of those years does not represent the likely trend of what is going to happen. Needless to say, we shall never get rid of terrorism. This will always find its way to the surface. But I think as dictators become more and more scientific, more and more concerned with a technically perfectly running society, they will be more and more interested in the kind of techniques which I imagined and described from existing realities in Brave New World. It seems to me not very far away that we've already the kind of controller here, and it remains to be seen when and where and by whom they will first be applied in any large scale. The improvement even in the techniques of terrorism, I think there have been improvements. Pavlov made some extremely profound observations both on animals and on human beings, and he found conditioning techniques applied to animals or humans in a state either of psychological or physical stress, and were extremely difficult to get rid of. There is a real difference between ourselves and, say, the inquisitors of the 16th century. We know much more precisely what we are doing, producing something which really works. The recent history of brainwashing, both as applied to prisoners of war and to the lower personnel within the Communist Party in China, we see that the Pavlovian methods have been applied systematically and evidently with extraordinary efficacy. I mean, I think there can be no doubt by the application of these methods, a very large army of totally devoted people has been created. The conditioning has been driven in so deep that it's very difficult for it ever to be rooted out. These methods are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with acceptance that the person is subjected to a form of terroristic stress for the purpose of inducing a kind of voluntary, quotes, acceptance of the psychological state into which he has been driven and the state of affairs within which he finds himself. Well, then we come to non-terroristic techniques for inducing consent, inducing people to love their servitude. A few of the more obvious methods. First of all, there's the straight suggestion and hypnosis. People, of course, have always known about suggestion, and they didn't know the word hypnosis, and they certainly practiced it. For example, difference between individuals in regard to their suggestibility. You will find, for example, experienced hypnotists, the percentage of people who can be hypnotized just like that is about 20%. Corresponding